Okay, good evening and welcome. Welcome to those of you who are online joining us as well. We are presenting tonight's event both online and in person. So if you are online, please note that the captioning option is available if you would like to use that. There's just a button at the bottom of your screen you click that says allow captioning, I think. So welcome this evening. Welcome those who are here in person as well. Really glad that you've all joined us this evening. The event that we're hosting is presented by the Lead Center and its Mellon Foundation grant, which is aimed at bringing the performing arts into DEI initiatives with support, of course, from the Commons, which is both this physical space we are in, but also this conceptual space that we are in at the University of Kansas, which works to build space for dialogue across disciplines and opportunities across research fields, while also creating space for this work to be happening in dialogue and partnership with larger communities. My name is Emily Ryan. I'm the director of the Commons, and I am joining you today from what is currently known as Lawrence, Kansas. And to situate us in a common physical, though virtual space, as well as a mindset to receive tonight's discussion and to call us to mindful action, I want to acknowledge where we are, and that the history of this place has been characterized by the violence, theft, and genocide that so often accompany colonialism, and that because of them, the landscape we know today is different and it is significantly altered. In present day Lawrence, Kansas, we are residing on land that is nourished by both the Kansas River, which flows through to our north, and the Wakarusa River to our south. This place is home to human and more than human species, including plants like echinacea, silphium, and milkweed, and animals like red-tailed hawks and king snakes and bison. It's also a temporal home to many who have moved through this place, both by choice and by force. And in this change of seasons, we find ourselves amid a critical time of vulnerability and transience, in particular for those who find themselves on the move, modeled by the biannual migrations through this place made by the monarch and many others. This land is characterized by wetlands, rolling hills, and also prairie. As present day occupants of the land, we are not far removed from a history that tells us the original human stewards of this place were forced to move by the US government when they took the land in 1825. As we know today in the state of Kansas, this land is still home to many First Nations people, including the many students, staff, and faculty at both the University of Kansas and Haskell Indian Nations University, whose collective wisdom expands our potential as humans and relatives, and whose individual experiences and ways of knowing and relating to the land are vast and many. I offer this statement with continued commitment to help create a present and future where their systems of knowledge may not be lost and their lives not further made worse by acts of colonialism. With that acknowledgement and in the capacity that I can, I'm really grateful to welcome you tonight to this event, which builds upon our love for this place, our home planet, and offers wisdom for how we humans can be in better community with one another as we live in relationship with it. At this point, I am very pleased to introduce to you Jancita Warrington, who is Menominee, Potawatomi, and Ho-Chunk, and she is the Indigenous consultant on this Mellon initiative, and will introduce tonight's speaker. So, Jancita.
Hi, I just wanted to say poso to everybody that's online with us this evening, and I'm glad that you decided to join in tonight. I'm here to introduce our guest speaker. His English name is Paul DeMain, and also known by his tribal name of Skabewis. He's a citizen of the Oneida Nation and of Ojibwe descent. He resides near Hayward, Wisconsin on the Lac Coutre Oreilles reservation. He's the former editor of the News from Indian Country, published from 1986 to 2019, and a producer for Indian Country TV, and currently the board chair for the Minnesota environmental advocacy organization Honor the Earth. Paul's exceptional journalism and the paper have been honored with major awards from the Native American Journalists Association and the Payne Award for Ethics in Journalism from the University of Oregon. In August of 2019, after 33 years, News from Indian Country published its last issue. Paul now focuses full-time as the board chairman for the Honor the Earth, an organization formed in 1993 as a collaboration between musicians and tribal activists, promoting awareness of environmental and cultural issues. Using media, financial resources, music, and art, Honor the Earth reaffirms a commitment to humanity and the earth. Joining with the front lines of the Native environmental movement, Honor the Earth has supported work to defeat nuclear waste dump proposals, sulfide mining, and mega dam projects, dirty tar sand pipelines, and funds programs transitioning to a fossil-free future. I grew up with news from Indian country as a vital resource that was relied upon by many tribal communities nationwide, keeping Indian country informed of critical issues pertaining to their communities. It became essential for many households and provided tremendous access to information not otherwise provided in the media. Skabewis's continuing environmental work and exercising of treaty rights is equally important for the future of Indian country. Community leaders that hold both activism experiences and the cultural knowledge like Skabewis are becoming more rare in our communities. And it is an honor that we have him here tonight at KU to share some of his profound insight and experiences with us. So miigwech Skabewis and welcome to KU.
Thank you, Jancita. Thank you everyone who is out there in the cyber world looking in. I'm required to turn on my mic first here. Leaning into this new digital technology, the on and off button is probably the easiest thing to do. So I want to say again, thanks for the introduction and thanks for the invitation to come down here. And thank all of you who are out there in the cyber world watching from who knows where in the universe. My Ojibwe name is Skabewis, and I would typically say this, Buju and Dinowe Maganeduk, Skabewis and Nijini Kaz, Makwa Dudame, Odawa Tsagai Gining, Indunjiba Nungum, Mino Gijigat, Mino Wadash Makwa Dudame. And so I am a member and citizen of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin and of Ojibwe descent, and my Ojibwe name kind of translates basically to the messenger, but it carries with it an awful lot of other responsibilities. And some of those responsibilities have to do with this image that you're looking at that I have up there. I'm not sure, am I showing up on the images too, or just the PowerPoint? Am I side by side with the crew? Okay, all right, so we're gonna move right along here and start with the Earth because it's the only one we have. And we need to share that. We need to be concerned about it much more than some of our own individual needs. As we move forward, I believe that we need to once again come together as a larger community concerned about the welfare of basic things. And, you know, that's food and shelter and safety amongst our family and members and clans. So, let's see where this goes. I've been using this presentation for the last few. It was used on Earth Day a few days ago at the University of Eau Claire, Barron County campus on Earth Day. And I started out with the proposition that Enbridge has not bought that particular entity because in the last 2 or 3 years, they've spent tremendous amounts of money trying to buy their social license to reroute Line 3 and now reroute Line 5 through northern Wisconsin. And the whole pipeline, fossil fuel, global warming, climate change debate that's occurring. And so Enbridge, a foreign corporation, last year contracted for about $300 million worth of services from Native American contractors for the first time in their 75-year history. And so water protectors have forced this foreign corporation from Canada to spend a lot of money in our community when in the past, not only the tribal community was ignored, but pretty much all the communities in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota in the last 70 or so years that they've been running their pipelines through the United States as a shortcut to Texas refineries or the Sarnia Ontario, Canada refineries that Line 5 reaches. And so these are some of the elders that I work with, two in particular, sitting down, singing. I'm not quite sure why that old man is recording me singing there, because I learned a lot of songs from him as a young man, when both he and some of the other elders at the Lac Coutre Oreilles Ojibwe reservation in northern Wisconsin pretty much decided that I was going to carry on some of the things they wanted carried into the future. And those included song, certainly some terms in Ojibwe. I didn't know Ojibwe at the time, but I'm getting much better in conversing nowadays, even though I can recite many prayers, because that's what I heard these elders do consistently over the years in terms of conducting ceremony in the community. Archie never went to school, passed away when he was about 97, 98 years old, if I remember right. Pipe mustache in the middle, was a 4th degree Medewan like Archie Mose, and was born in the late 1890s. And so many of the stories that I heard from some of these elders went back to recitations about what their grandfathers or grandmothers had said. Pipe sometimes would complain about the treaties, because he heard his grandfather complain about the negotiations and the coercion used in the formation of the treaties with the United States government, starting in 1825 and the last one being in 1854. So even though I wasn't attuned to try to learn things and spend time with these guys, because I was a young guy that wanted to go out and drink on weekends and enjoy life in a lot of ways, they demanded my attention, and they got a lot of it. And of course, now that I'm peaking in age and getting close to the ripe old age of 70, I often wish that I would have spent a lot more time listening and asking questions of these elders, because I'm ready for the latest course. You know, I went through Head Start, and I went through elementary school in terms of traditional ecological knowledge, in terms of language, in terms of medicines, in terms of spiritual songs, in terms of structures and conduct, and how you conduct yourself around tobacco and how you use tobacco. Those are the responsibilities of the Skabewis. And my name, well, it's very short and translates simply to the messenger in Ojibwe. If we had a recitation of the responsibilities that come with that name, I would be here an awful long time, because I'm actually still learning some of the responsibilities that come with my title. It's both a title and a name, something I can't get rid of, because it's not only my Ojibwe name, but if they need someone to do some work, that's what I had the responsibility to do. This is my world of learning at a certain level. This is a scroll by James Red Sky that's been in public domain for quite some time. I actually had a chance to review about 4 or 5 different versions of that scroll. And I guess I can point out up here for people to say, but on the left side over here is Leech Lake, Minnesota. And all this stuff I'm very familiar with. There's Lake Superior there. This is Sault Ste. Marie and the rapids in the area. Madeline Island is somewhere, should be right around here. That's Madeline Island. This is Fond du Lac and the Fond du Lac trading post. All this stuff is pretty familiar for people. And in fact, you can pretty much take this chunk here all the way down to here through the St. Lawrence River. And you can pretty much say that this represents a Rand McNally map, probably from about 1,000 years, because only in the last couple of 100 years have I seen scrolls that actually personalize this area over here. And basically by personalization, what I mean is people added things to get them home, from some central location. So it's like going to Kansas City and adding another little section to the birch bark scroll that says, how do I get down to Lawrence properly without getting lost? So there's been modifications on this end of the scroll. This is the Atlantic Ocean right here, about 25% of the way. This stuff is very highly spiritual. And I've talked a couple times today about this scroll, saying I would suggest that if we were to talk about this at the college graduate level, that we could spend the next 3 or 4 months talking about it. We'd spend a week bringing in some of the historic, the elders and knowledge in our community and talk about the history of this scroll. We would bring in who know how to read the particular components. You know, there's a Thunderbird on a rock over here that says you can go north. It's a safe passage. There's a portage right here in this area. There's another portage around here. So there are Rand McNally map kind of things that tell me certain things, but there are elders who could add to that a tremendous amount of additional information from my knowledge, because there's things that I don't know about it and I haven't learned about yet. And then maybe the next week I would bring in a group of political people and they could explain the migration from the East Coast into the place where wild rice grew in water, and the migration that continued on into Turtle Mountain, North Dakota, and the Little Shell Band up in Montana. And then, of course, half of the Ojibwe Nation resides in Canada, which was their Aboriginal territory. So it's pretty intriguing, but that's kind of my learning mode. That's how I kind of see things in relationships sometimes. I mean, this lays kind of a groundwork. There's lots of scrolls that say lots of different things. There's lots of scrolls that are so highly spiritual that you're never going to see them, and you're never going to hear the discussions about what they mean, in part because they are highly spiritual. They're very powerful when they're in that highly spiritual mode, and they ought not be construed wrongly by people who peer in and say, well, that's really interesting, but it can't be true. We just got done with winter storytelling here. There's still snow on the ground somewhere, and probably on the earth anywhere. So they say as long as there's snow on the ground, you can tell these stories with characters in them and recite them. Some of them are like Winnebuju story-like, but there are true, I call them true stories, because you will hear the storytellers as they've been told by their relatives. These are true stories. And so I say that because we usually only tell those stories during the winter because they have characters that are now waking up and they don't want to be spoken of badly and teased about their faults as other creatures on earth. And so we rest their names during the summertime, and when there's snow on the ground, we can tell those stories because we're better protected, but it's also an activity during the winter that keeps grandma and grandpa and other people traditionally in the lodge, and even today, busy reciting stories about the creation of the earth, about the time Winnebuju went around and named everything, how he went around and everything he named, that if he named a plant that was some kind of a disease, he named a plant that was a cure to that disease, so that everything was balanced, and how he went around and did all kinds of things that caused trouble and havoc, because while he was half man and half spirit, I guess just like Jesus was both man and spirit and a messenger from God, or Winnebuju or Nanabush or Skabewis, I believe they call them in other places. We all have this character that was out there that had highly spiritual powers, but also was fraught with all the nature of human beings. And so he got in trouble a lot, and he caused a lot of mischief on earth. But both Winnebuju and these Atazokanan, which are true stories, are things that teach us things about life and things that actually happen. And so when I spoke not too long ago, and I do this sometimes, I spoke in front of a church group, and I says, well, during the flood, Winnebuju did this, and he was involved in trying to retrieve, get the animals to retrieve a little piece of the earth so he could put it on the back of a turtle and grow the earth. Some lady held up her hand, and she says, you got a flood in your stories? I says, yeah, it flooded our half of the earth too. Pretty simple concept. If there was a big flood, there was a big flood. And if we have that story and you have it in the Bible, you know what? You go talk to other indigenous cultures and people around the world. They have stories of the flood, which probably means it's true. Well, we got Winnebago doing some neat things during this time period that are extra natural and all that kind of a thing. And I says, yeah, you know, I mean, try to tell me about Jonah being swallowed by the whale. You know, I mean, yeah, that's kind of extraordinary and not quite usual. I mean, Moses parted the sea. And we have characters like that too. But let's go back to the original premise. We all had this flood. It's some kind of a truth. Now, in Ojibwe lore, we've had a couple floods. And each time there was a flood, it was because of mankind and how mankind treated the other animals in the earth, to the point that the earth was so degraded that it needed to cleanse itself and it needed to destroy everything and start over. And so one of the stories you'll read in a lot of places is that story of one of the floods that I was told about in the launch, because our elder says there was more than one. This has happened before. And a lot of the elders says, watch to where we're going nowadays. The Hopi and the Iroquois and everyone, they talk a lot about it. We've been through this before, this prophecy of destroying the earth. And, you know, we got elders that say, look at, and science is saying it too. You know, all the big mammals are almost gone. The rhinoceroses, the elephants, the lions, the grizzly bears, the polar bears. A lot of the big mammals are on the edge of extinction. There's only one big mammal that's really overly populated right now, and that's human beings, because that's all we are, is another large mammal. In our stories, human beings were put on the earth last. Everything else was here and worked in unison with each other. And none of that is dependent on human beings. Human beings are dependent on the rest of the chain. And so when I went to Germany a few years ago and someone says, what do you see up on this lake? It's a beautiful lake. What do you see? What do you feel? I says, I don't hear anything. I don't see any birds. I don't see any bugs on the water. I don't see anything. What happened here? Oh, this is what happens when acid rain kills everything off. The whole food chain starts dying. And pretty soon you don't have birds because they can't find anything to eat. And you don't have any fish because the lake's acidic and everything else. It's a good way to kill everything off. The white birch trees looked like they had been burned in a fire of some kind from acid rain. And so we find these examples again and again in the world. That really concerns me, because what the elders have said is that what they've seen, like Archie and Pipe said, a deterioration of the earth and its capacity to provide for its human people, because human beings are not treating it correctly. They want and want and want and want and want. There's too many people that want this. They want a bigger this and a bigger that, a larger that, and more of those and everything else. You know, can we build the house another 10,000 feet rather than, 100? Is 50,000 square feet enough, or 60 or 100 or whatever it is? Because, well, I got all this money, I can build it bigger, bigger, and bigger, put more plugs in, use more electricity, heat more things, use more resources. This is the only earth we have. And we're beginning to run out of those resources. That's why Elon Musk is going to go harness the planet out there and pull it in here and mine that, and we'll shut down all the mines on the earth, kind of a thing. It might be a good idea, I don't know, but I think we ought to just look at the paradigm and see if we can't revise the paradigm here without having to try to count on something out there providing the answer. Let's do it here. So when I say here's the paradigm that I grew up around, kind of envisioned philosophically, here's the paradigm some of my friends and relatives. Here's a fossil fuel, global warming, climate change scroll of some kind. It's the foreign-owned oil company, Canadian U.S. oil pipeline grid in the United States. And if you notice, a lot of it comes out of up in Edmonton and Hardisty, Alberta, Canada, and it runs right to the refineries of the Gulf of Mexico, because why would anyone in the U.S. want to buy a barrel of tar sands oil at $95 a barrel when you can buy it for what, $77 in the fracking area of Montana and Wyoming and stuff, and you can buy it pooled out of Oklahoma at 55. Oh yeah, the gas station down there is selling gas at $10 a gallon. Let's run down there and buy that because that sounds like a good deal. Well, people don't buy Canadian tar sands in the United States. They send it to some of these ports and areas and it's refined in other products. Those products are sent overseas to China where they make, you know, plastic petroleum-based ice scrapers that we're reliant on, because if we didn't have the petroleum-based ice scrapers for our windshield cars that were made in China and Singapore from fossil fuel tar sand products in the United States, we would just sit there for days wondering what to do. I mean, it used to be that we would turn the car on and turn the fan on and it would melt off after a little while. But nowadays we would all be stuck for days if we didn't have these petroleum products that we rely upon, as the industry says, oh, we all rely on all these nice things. But these Canadian lines don't do it. And we're in a big battle up there. And it really goes back to legends about the black snake. And if you go back to those legends, you'll find them and look for them. Look for the story about the Thunderbird and the underworld serpents. You'll find them all over the place. You can go to the Menominee Reservation and some people will tell you that, oh, on Wolf River, there was a big fight up there between the Thunderbirds and the serpents at one time, and they busted the whole place up. You'll find stories about the Thunderbirds and the serpents battling up in Duluth, Minnesota, and they threw each other around, and when one of the Thunderbirds hit a bay down there, created a great big sand pit area of some kind. So you find stories, and you find them amongst other tribes. Because at one point, they say, the Creator said, all these underworld serpents and things underneath are going to have their own world into the above, and they're going to be ruled by these serpents, the underworld. The upper world is going to be ruled by the Thunderbirds that the human beings are on, and some big old black snake decided that he wanted to be the leader of everything. You know, I mean, he helped get Putin to invade Ukraine because they wanted it, kind of a thing. So he decided he was going to be the master over the upper world as well. And they engaged in a battle that might have taken hundreds of years and did all kinds of damage and everything, because the Thunderbirds finally ended up pinning this big black snake to the ground. But he didn't kill him. He was told by the spirits, your responsibility is not to kill off the underworld leadership. Your responsibility is to bring things back into balance the way the creation made it. So don't kill off any of those underworld serpents. Put them in their place and hold them there. And that's where they say everything is this day, back into balance to that extent. Now, what does that story have to do with today? It kind of interests me because, you know, there's a lot of people who are really angry at things and they want to go hurt people. And we got to keep telling people our job is not to kill off maybe the fossil fuel industry, but try to bring it back into balance. Yes, we might be reliant on fossil fuels for a number of years. I expect that. I drove down here, excuse me, I had to use some gas. Thank you, Enbridge, for bringing a little bit of gas in the United States, maybe. But we have to get away from a paradigm where we're destroying the earth. And our children know that. They can see it better than we can. And the scientists can see it. And the animals know it everywhere. Last summer on the Shell River, where Enbridge was putting in a new line, they had a permit for 500 million gallons of water. In the middle of Minnesota's worst drought in 2 centuries, they asked for, and within 3 weeks, got a change order for the project from 500 million gallons to 5 billion gallons of water. And it seems strange that they would do that in the middle of a drought, because you think there'd be less watering, because what they're doing is dewatering. They're digging a trench through a wetlands and they got to dewater it. So they have a right to take all this water What we now know is they had a breach on an aquifer in Clearwater, Minnesota in January, and we think that at least part of the request was try to cover up for the loss of that water out of a breach. There's another breach on the Fond du Lac reservation that's still running today as well, and they had 3 aquifer breaches during the engineering. So why would you do that? So I'm going to start moving along here. I wanted to, let's take a real quick break here. I'm going to try to play this a musical that we produced at On the Earth called No More Pipeline Blues. And so I have to escape from here. I hit escape. And then I minimize. Oh, and I don't even have to minimize because what I got to do is bring this up. I got to minimize this. I'll get there. This is technically challenged. Then I want to hit play. And then I want to enlarge it.
Ninga shechike nebe onche. Ninga shechike nebe onche.
This is the same water that was here when dinosaurs were here. There is no new water. This is the only water we will ever know. This is the same water that my great ancestors drank from and harvested our wild rice upon.
On this land where we belong, surrounded by the northern lights. On this land where we belong, beneath the starlit night.
On this land where we belong, wild and no mangroves. Our blood runs red through the watershed of the Mama King.
On this land where we belong, rivers, lakes, and streams flow through the heartland of the sacred Mississippi.
This water is sacred. Water is sacred because without water, there is no life. You cannot drink oil.
On this land to which we belong, from the Canadian tar sand, 1 million barrels of oil in the day to come through these sacred lands. On this land to which we belong, with oil thicker than crude, 4,000 workers coming our way, got them pandemic pipeline blues.
This moment is that moment where we face that oil. This is the moment where we face line 3 and say, no, you will not take our water.
On this land to which we belong, with pipelines that corrode, when they break, it'll be too late. It'll kill this river road. On this land where we belong, don't let that pipeline through. No more drill cats on native land. No more pipeline blues. No more drill cats on public land. No more pipeline blues. No more drill cats on sacred land. No more pipeline blues. No more. Don't let Lac Coutre come through.
You are a story fed by generations. You carry songs of grief, triumph, thankfulness, and joy. Feel their power as they ascend within you. As you walk, run swiftly, even fly into infinite possibility. Let go that which burdens you. Let go any acts of unkindness or brutality. Let go that which has burdened your family, your community, your nation, or disturbed your soul. Let go one breath into another. Pray thankfulness for this earth we are, for this becoming we are, for this sunlight touching skin we are, for the cooling waters we are. Listen now as Earth sheds her skin. Listen as the generations move one against the other to make power. We are bringing in a new story. We will be accompanied by ancient and new songs, and will celebrate together.
Nepe, kisake iku, kimi kwachawayna miku, kishawayna miku. Nepe, kisake iku, kimi kwachawayna miku, kishawayna miku.
Okay. Let's see, what do I got to hit? Get back full screen. Just one little help here. I'm almost there. There it is. Okay, thank you. So let's move right along. So I usually did this thing about language, but it's suffice to say that it's another example of the capability. Take a screenshot, a shot of this if you want out there. What I'm saying here is that with 235 utterances in the Ojibwe language, I can create a vocabulary of almost 600,000 unique words when the average English speaker uses about 20 to 24,000 unique words. And it's simply by utilizing combinations and in the right order. And I've talked with linguistics about this and mathematicians. It's attuned to the same relationship about how some languages can sound beautiful because they're in prime numbers, because they coincide with each other, just like weaving and beadwork and leaves and other geometric things in mathematical formulas that are found on Earth. There are prime number pleasant seeing and thinking things and unpleasant activities when you don't use prime numbers. So when I see sapping, I see it very much more intensely than other people because I see the 26 elements that are in maple syrup, not the 13 that are in cane sugar, or not the 6 that are in beet sugar, or no redeeming elements at all in corn syrup that's used extensively to sweeten everything. I go back to the traditional idea that maple was here and maple is what we used, and we didn't make pancake syrup for, we didn't have syrup. We took it down to sugar and used it for preserving things and mixing with things and utilizing as a food medicine year round. So it went right to sugar. We didn't refine things to make it pleasing to the eye. We didn't bleach our sugar to make it nice and white. We didn't bleach out our flour to make it nice and white. We didn't throw the apple peels away, the most nutritious part. We didn't throw the potato peels away, the most nutritious part, to make everything look pretty. But this is how much product in Ontonagon Mission, 248,000 pounds of sugar, and that's 8 pounds of sugar per gallon of sap. Some of the prices from 2014, gallons of sap are now going for 65 to 70, but it shows you as part of the economy that we relied upon, in addition to other products in the woods, many that we're still rediscovering and reusing, and manoomin and wild rice is one of them, and you'll hear about all kinds of battles, all kinds of stories about rice. When you looked at that migration scroll that I showed earlier, the reason Ojibwe and Algonquin-based speaking people moved to the Great Lakes is because they were told in a prophecy to move to where food grew back on water. I've heard stories that said they were told to go back and move back to the place where food grew in water, which might suggest that they had already been there one time. But this migration from the East Coast took place about 800 to 1,000 years ago into Madeline Island and Duluth area, and that's where the Ojibwe reside today. There's my rice at the bottom. What you're looking at is a Three Sisters garden of corn, beans, and squash. And every year my garden gets bigger And this year with World War III breaking out, or the potential for World War III, if you don't think it already is World War III or getting to that point, my garden's going to double so that I have enough food to get through next winter. I'll probably go on a roll of toilet paper buying bash too real quick to make sure that I got both food and enough supplies to get through the next crisis. There's our Manuman, some of our lakes in northern Minnesota, Wisconsin at the Caughoggan Sloughs. Take out about 40,000 pounds of rice at $20 a pound nowadays. You're talking about millions of dollars of economy and food in the shelves of Ojibwe people. Those are rice worms. So rice worms are really good. You get them out of there. Birds eat them a lot of times, but when you harvest, you find them and you fry them up. And my grandchildren all love rice worms with a little bit of seasoning salt on them. So you find Ojibwe people and people, the Menominees, the Menumenini people, the Budawatomi, the Potawatomis, Sac and Fox, and Miami, and a lot of Algonquin speaking people that came from the East Coast. Save our wild rice. We're not fooling about having reserved the right to harvest and wild rice in the treaties. Our grandparents thought a lot about us, and they said if we're going to give up the land, we want to make sure that they have the resources to be able to survive into the future. And we take those rights seriously. This is a tar sands mine in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Some of the Cree people that came and visited us at Lac Coutre Oreilles said that they had to move one of their field camps during the summer another 30 or 40 miles away from this operation because the fumes were disrupting their summer schooling with the kids, and they could smell it on a regular basis and at night, so they had to move their trap and hunting lines, which were already about 40 miles from this site, from what I was told, and so they had to move it another 30 or 40 miles out. This is a corn collection amongst the Oneida only. Rowan White and Mohawk has identified some almost 700 varieties of corn. So we knew about hybriding. We did hybriding with wild rice. There was a place in Wisconsin that took seeding of rice from the Red River Valley up in Canada, which was a shorter season rice, and introducing it into a longer growing season area to try to hybrid it. The about 700 forms of corn, Oz people, because a lot of people are used to seeing this really pretty corn around Halloween time that it comes out, and Thanksgiving, and you see it nice and colorful, but it was just one of over 700 varieties. So we knew a lot about DNA engineering. We did it with corn, beans, and squash, and wild rice, and taking seeds from high volume maple producing trees and reintroducing them because they were high sugar content trees. So agriculture was very sophisticated at different times in history, and we're not given very much credit for it. Those are squash. And of course, our activities all over the United States, it's a lot of community people expect the Indian tribes to be the one to step up and fight the battles against things, but we're finding great alliances amongst people in the environmental movement that are waking up to the global warming and the climate change aspects. They can see it in everyday life. They've been experiencing it. And so they're joining together. Those are the oil spills that have occurred in the United States so far in the last probably 25, 30 years. Most of the pipelines were put in. This is a spill in Kalamazoo, Michigan that took place. Most of these deteriorating pipelines are 60 or 70 years old. They were put in when EPA didn't exist. Another spill site that's in people too. These are the 4 pipelines that go through Wisconsin, and a proposed 66 over to the left that isn't identified yet. Enbridge wants to put in another line to bring tar sands down to the Texas refineries. We're worried about the feed resources in our region. What's good if you can hunt a deer if it's got chronic wasting disease? What good is the food and the fish if they have mercury in it, and FISA chemicals, which is a big talk, forever chemicals from all kinds of things. If you can't feed it to your kids because it'll kill your kids off in early life, or it'll make a baby abort if your wife's pregnant, what right is a treaty right if the resources has been contaminated? And here's a Enbridge pipeline that was 4 to 6 feet buried under in a wetlands that's just popped out. You can see the outer casing deteriorating off it, which is causing problems and which is causing in part the spills. I'm into mushrooms, all kinds of mushrooms. This is chicken. There's chicken mushrooms all cut up, nutritional. This is lion's mane. You know, it's being studied for spinal cord injury repair and dementia and Parkinson's disease. And it's showing to be, I told you earlier that when Winnebago went around for every disease and affliction he made sure there was a plan to undo it. And so there's a lot of things. We lost in our Ojibwe community a lot of our traditional ecological knowledge and information on mushrooms, on stargazing. But the thing is there's pockets of this information. So it's really important to try to gather it up. There's some blackberries. You know, I found a real nice patch of blackberries when I put a new trailer on my home site. For 2 or 3 years, I enjoyed all these blackberries. And then on my 3rd year, the bears attacked my corn garden and ate every ear of corn. And I said, okay, we're even up now. Let's call it truce. But what happens to my berries and what happens to even the Oneida white flint corn that I grow when these kinds of things happen? You know, these Superior, Wisconsin avoided a disaster. There's one of these terminals down here, one of these round things you're seeing is loaded with hydrocarbon something or another that would have blown up and killed 20,000 people in the Duluth Harbor area had it gone up this day when some of these other things went down. This is an old Enbridge refinery that they sold a few years ago, and it's certainly had problems. It's no wonder. Here's the finances that we're up against. This was the Dakota Access funders for the line out there through North and South Dakota that ran through the Standing Rock Reservation that caused a ruckus. All over on the left is all the investors with stock owners all over the world that making a lot of money. These energy transportation companies like Enron that folded at one point, make a lot of money in the process. They're making a lot of money now. There hasn't been any disruption in the flow of oil. What there is speculation about what might happen if there's a disruption in the oil. But oil companies have made billions of dollars off the rise of the product at the gas station. Why people complain about the $5 a gallon of gas, they'll pay $72 for a gallon of coffee at Starbucks. Interesting priorities. Mushrooms, wild onions. We get together and talk about these things on a regular basis. This is hydroponics at the Oneida Nation in Wisconsin that feeds the high school students at noon with both fish and different types of lettuce. This is a Enbridge Pipeline 5 that runs through a meander on the Bad River Reservation when this was put in the 1950s. If you look up to the right-hand corner up here, right here, see that? That's the old river. That's the old river course that came around here and down through here. It was 158 feet from the pipeline. It's now 18 to 25 feet. This was carved out in one of 3 1,000-year rain events that occurred in northern Wisconsin in 10 years. They had just replaced this with what was supposed to be a 500 to 1,000-year rain event, and it got washed out the year after they put it in by the 3rd 1,000-year event occurring in northern Wisconsin. And see, these are oil spills on line 5, and that's going to be in the news with Bad River. These are the potential leak sites from line 5 into the Bad River fisheries, but that's all the Wisconsin, Minnesota commercial fisheries area as well. So we're looking for allies. That's line 5 washed out on the Bad River Reservation at Denemy Creek. There was a hunter walking in the woods. And what happened is when they put this line in the 1950s, this was 2 years ago, they discovered this, and it had created a whole new riverbed that came down, and when it hit the pipeline, went off and followed the pipeline and washed it all out. This was hanging up in the air. They got tremendous problems at Mackinac. This is what I'm for. This is birch syrup. This is maple syrup. These are corn products from out west. These are meat products, Potawatomi deer meat at one time processed, deer meat, Tatanka buffalo, all kinds of beans of all kinds. And so the indigenous community is trying to train a whole category of young people to begin reinventing indigenous cuisine. Sean Sherman Tashea Hart, Brian Yazzie, and so forth. That's some of the people in this picture over here. Sean's in the middle there, is rebuilding indigenous cuisine. Arlie Dockstader in the background. So just some wonderful people here who just cook unbelievable, wonderful stuff. And this is grandma's cuisine, right? And you want to remember that our community was designated to go to the commodities food shop and take a lot of flour and greasy stuff and fry bread, which is non-traditional indigenous, and then eat Spam and monkey meat and other things from government rations as we got cut off from our food sources and forced to the reservation, started getting heart disease and dying of diabetes. We're trying to get back to a healthy diet where we can enjoy our winter storytelling times without having to worry about running up to the local clinic to get calcium supplements because we filter all the calcium and sugar nitrates out of our syrup to make it pleasing to the eye and those kinds of things. So we're getting back to those traditional diets. And ladies like these are the key to part of that because they remember living out of the woods with other midwives and medicine women and men who knew the woods and could feed themselves. This was actually a conference of 700 people who fed themselves for 6 days over in Pokagon, Michigan, on food that was harvested from the woods within a 60-mile radius of where the 700 of us were. Anyone with diabetes was checked by Indian Health Service and medical people going into this conference and coming back. The numbers were much, much better. This is the Dakota Access. The good people of Bismarck didn't want a pipeline running north of Bismarck because if it leaked, it might flood their it might ruin the source of their drinking water. And so it went down south of Bismarck over across the Standing Rock Reservation where it wasn't wanted, where it crossed the lake down there that it had flooded some of the prime agricultural grounds, 60 years earlier by the Army Corps of Engineers that said, we're going to put a dam down here because we have to make electricity for white people who need, really literally at the time, non-indigenous people that needed your electricity, and we need to control the water because so many people have bought real estate down in the floodplains of the Mississippi and Missouri that we've got to dam the Standing Rock Reservation waters and make sure that we can control it for downstream benefits. Sorry, farmers, you've got the most productive, best soil out in South Dakota along the riverbeds, but the Army Corps of Engineers and other people need it. Sorry, Indians, goodbye. That's part of the reason that people get pissed off and fight about all these projects. We've had enough of this garbage and we're not going to take it anymore. So rather than being angry, we get together and talk about feeding ourselves, how to take care of our own communities, how to reinstill mental health, how to get over the missing and murdered Indian women when pipeline companies come into our community and men need sex from the young women or vulnerable people who need their next fix in those things. We want to get people put in the woods. We want them to get back healthy so they don't have to spend all their time at the Indian Health Clinic on dialysis and picking up pills there. We want to get them back into storytelling and the legends so they understand the world of Winnebago and maple syrup and wild onions and walnut, the walnut and hazelnut, and, all the other trees that could be tapped and medicines can be made out of it. We look at the foods and the fields as our pharmacy at a place where it can feed us, at a place that we are comfortable with. And when the wolves howl, I'll get up and howl around a little bit too, just to confuse them and learn to understand what they're trying to say about the world around us. This is an Honor the Earth solar panel. So the organization I'm involved with is actually not involved in just fighting pipelines. It's got a whole component where we re-grant money that's provided by the Indigo Girls Concert Series on it. I think it was $150,000 last year that went back into communities to paint community public buildings up with youth, to bring to buy musical instruments for kids that needed horns and guitars and stuff in their community. We've got a solar thermal panel operation that we got interns working at. We go tons of corn. We've been growing with affiliate organizations hemp for about 7 or 8 years now. We're ready to expand out into products, including potential production of batteries, which is quite a ways away in terms of what it might hold, but we're looking at clothing, we're looking at CBD oils, we're looking at 27 different varieties of hemp seeds that do different things, stuff like that. This is a solar energy project not too far from that tar sands that you saw. Some of the tribes up in Canada says we're going to take the cue and get into alternative energy and get off fossil fuels because of the garbage party, you know, the devastation that this has been. So we're back to Earth Day hasn't been purchased yet. The beginning is near like this rather than the end is near. The beginning is near people because Archie Mose and those people says, when I asked, do you have any hope? He said, no, not for human beings. He says, but I had a dream about the earth after the next flood comes. I looked down on it, it's so beautiful. The water was so blue. All the plants were so green and I could see other animals, but I couldn't see any human beings. And he says, and that makes me happy since I've seen what human beings can do to the destruction of everything else around them. So he says, I'm fine with it. If that's what the next flood takes is to wipe the big mammal human beings off this earth so everything else can work in harmony with each other, so be it. So we're getting together on Saturday, June 25th in Ashland, Wisconsin. You happen to be in the area at cyberspace, come visit us. All the people who love water are going to be up there as much as possible in the Great Lakes area, fighting mines, fighting pipelines, fighting the big factory swine operations, and all those other devastating things to our communities so that one of these days we can go home in peace and tell winter stories without having to tell the story about the big black snake and how we had to fight him. After 50,000 years when he was put in his place, he reared his head and came back. And so we're honoring some of our elders that led the way on these battles as well during that time period. I think that's the last one I got. End of slideshow. So are there questions that on the monitor at all?
We'll give folks a minute to share questions online.
Just do that as a backdrop then. Any questions in the audience that they can take care of while they're looking at chat and seeing if any of the students that are still awake out there in cyberspace?
Hi. Thanks for your talk. And I had a few random questions about some of your slides and stuff. So I think you were talking about, so there's some pipelines that got excavated by rivers flowing near them. Were some of them heaved up by frost and thawed?
Wait a minute. Oh. There was one line on line 5, you saw a picture of it, that was eroded by, what happened is you had a creek coming down. Okay, let's take a look at this. You got a creek coming down to Lake Superior and they put a pipeline across it, right? And so as the water came down and the pipeline is 6 feet underwater because they excavated across here, the creek bed took a turn and went down and created a whole new bed. And during that time period, so it ran along the easement. That's why you see a pipeline exposed. It washed it out. It eventually hit a bank, a natural bank, and curved back down into its bed. But a hunter walking in the woods came across it. Enbridge didn't see it. Most, 80% of every incident having to do with pipelines is found by citizens just walking around looking. Oh. They're not found by Enbridge. In the case of the Kalamazoo leak, which ran for 18 hours, think about that, 18 hours, the Kalamazoo leak. I had a picture of it. You saw a picture of it. I could go to it real quick. Ran for a long time, and the pump line system actually was shut off automatically twice during that 18 hours. And Enbridge was so assured of itself that the engineers came in. Let's see if I can get it. Watch, it'll probably bop up right to the first one rather than, oh, there it is. Okay, so that's the Kalamazoo spill. Line 7 at that time was still mainly a downhill gravity-driven line. Okay, so there were some shut-off places. The system automatically shut down from a loss of pressure. an engineer came in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and says, oh, the line 7 is shut down. We're Enbridge. There must be an air bubble in there, and started the pump again. 7 or 8 hours later, an Enbridge engineer came in there and looked at it, says, I'll be darned if the pumps on line 7 shut off. And says, we're Enbridge. We're almost like a genius. We're pretty perfect. And hit the switch and turn everything back on. Now, also from Alberta to Michigan, a good portion of the line is gravity driven. So Enbridge has been forced to put in, which is thank Enbridge. You know, they have to put in a lot more valves and stuff on river crossings and so forth since that spill. So they've sheeked it up, but this is a $2.5 billion spill so far that they love to take people in. Took a whole crew of elders from Lac Coutre Oreilles down there and says, look at how green that rebuilt riverbank is. It's nice and green, and you can have a picnic on it and everything else. Just don't notice the screening underneath that holds it all together. You know, don't tip over any rocks in the river, you know, because then you might see sheen. And don't look for frogs, they might be two-headed. But otherwise, we know how to deal with people who need their houses replaced, emergency lung damage and surge claims from hospital. We do that really effectively. We replace, look at this, Kentucky green grass from here all the way down to, you know, kind of stuff. So you go over there and look at it, you know, you'll find stuff laying around yet at the bottom of the river and everywhere else. So your other question. Well,
thanks for more details. I just was wondering about several things like that, because I was wondering if one of them was heaved up by frost or something, or other effects, or
I don't care for whatever reason.
Yeah, I know.
It's sitting on top of it, heaving up right frost. Here's what you're talking about.
Oh.
You know, maybe their contractor says, let's save 4 feet worth of digging through this wetlands, and we'll just put it 2 feet under, because what happened at Clearwater when they breached the aquifer in January, the contractor who is monitoring that used to be an employee of Enbridge, but now says, let's form our own company, because then Enbridge can contract with people that are local rather than being an employee. We're going to do all these contracting. Said, well, let's just look the other way. Oh, you're not supposed to dig 18 feet down. It says in the engineering plan, you're only going to go get 10, but we've got to go 18. Just do it. We'll look the other way. You go 18 feet down, you blow up a aquifer that's highly pressurized. And then the monitor writes down, the DNR monitor, you know, there was more DNR officers on the line preventing water protectors from getting and slowing the Enbridge project down, because they didn't do anything but slow it down, than there was looking at the monitoring process, because it took from January when the breach was. And then the on-site monitor saying, yeah, we're having a problem with water. There's a little water running across that road, running across this road, running into the woods here. So we have a water problem, right? It wasn't until June that people inside the Minnesota DNR realized that there was an aquifer breach, okay? In engineering, you don't want to ever have an aquifer breach, ever, because it's like taking this highly pressurized room that's shooting water up through artesian wells for farmers and people along the beachfront, and where it bubbles out and everything else into the fens and everything else, and you bust a hole in it and it depressurizes and wetlands go dry and other bad things. Where are we at? 1 minute? Okay, yeah, so whatever happened here, I don't know. It popped out. It's come to the surface somehow, and probably through the frost and everything else. But the thing is this is a 70-year-old pipeline. There was no EPA. You can see that the outer coating is peeling off, and that the welds then are going to get water on them that are going to rust, and there's going to be a blowout. It's why there's been all those little red spots, and why on line 5, there's been 22 leaks on line 5 alone. There's probably been 60 integrity digs. What's an integrity dig? Some little pig thing goes through the thing and says, oh, there might be a leak here. You better go dig it up and check it, because the line is deteriorated. Enbridge is driving around a Model A, okay? They've painted it, they've renovated it and everything else, but deep inside of there, the infrastructure is gonna someday just kind of snap and say, I've had enough. You can't drive it any longer. Okay, these lines were built for 50 to 60 years of life. They're now operating on 60 and 70 and 80 in some cases. So I hope I answered your question.
Great.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. For those that can't see me, my name is Emily Gullickson, and I'm going to be reading the questions from online. And so the first one is, so thank you so much for this. Mr. DeMain, you mentioned that you wish you had spent more time in your youth asking questions of the elders who gave you your title, your name, who you are as a person. At this stage in your life, what would those questions be?
Well, a whole lot of questions, a whole lot of questions. There are so many teachings and so much language that I learned with these elders. And functionally speaking, I didn't converse with them. So if you're a fluent Ojibwe speaker and you come up to and say, hi, how are you and all that, you might get it, at least in the past, you'd get an elementary answer back that might not make linguistic sense. But I can pray for the food because I heard that prayer hundreds of times being around these elders. And it was the same prayer because we would come and say, well, we're going to bless an eagle feather, but today we're going to give thanksgiving to the food. Or we're going to here to celebrate the new jingle dress, or we're going to give someone an Indian name. So there was always this introduction portion, but then there was the Thanksgiving. And the Thanksgiving is the same. We want to give thanks to the Creator. We want to give thanks to all those things out there that provide food, provide medicine. We want to thank for the songs and the music, how the streams sound out in Midway Way, sound out with music. The birds sound out with music. There's so many things that are in that prayer that are standard. Their use of a high language intrigues me because those are not everyday conversational words. And one word alone had something to do with the offering, about how it gets offered up and it gets translated and it goes up to heaven and the Creator gets together a council and they all decided, dialogue and debate it and everything, and they come to a conclusion about what the result ought to be. So, for example, I know someone who is praying to be sober, and he was going to stay sober for everyone else in the world and take on all the humble problems, but he wanted to stay sober, and a week later he was on a wicked drunk, and he rolled his car and he got robbed of all his money. His wife filed for divorce. His kids said they didn't want anything to do with him again. And one of the elders says, when he came to the sweat lodge and prayed for his sobriety, the spirits gave him what he wanted. They could have given him instant sobriety that day, but he wasn't ready to accept that yet. And so they put him through hell so he could get where he needed to be, so he's ready to be sober. So be careful about what you pray for, is the admonishment. And in my prayers, I don't ask anything really other than the Creator to look down upon me, because everything else in my prayer is being thankful about life, about food, about music, about camaraderies, about enjoyment, about sharing, about communalism, about loving your mother and your grandmother, taking care of your kids, having responsibilities as a man to take care of your family and the things around you. That's what my prayers are for. I'm thankful for 150 things in my prayers. And all I ask for is that the Creator watch down on me and my family. That's all. Because you might not want to ask to win the Starbucks lottery and have $1 million. You might. But I hear that being that rich has broken a lot of lives of the people who got what they wanted. So there are lessons in all these things. There are lessons in all these things. And so, what would I ask? I was in Indian Knowledge 101, and my teachers have now passed on. I'd have 1,000 questions of them every day if I had that opportunity. Explain what Nabash Kabak 8 means again to me. I heard you once, but I want to hear another angle from it, you know, or, you know, tell me the story about the time when the conservation warden come up there and says, you know, all the Indians were complaining about the loss of wild rice. And the guy says, look at those birds out there eating that wild rice. And all the Indians laughed and said, he doesn't know anything. And all those birds are out there eating those rice worms you saw here fried up and seasoned a little bit earlier. They don't eat the rice, they eat the worms in it. Or when that same conservation guy came up there and he read the book about how to plant trees. You know, they planted all these trees during the conservation corps days, you know, and they had to be 4 feet height and the rows had to be 2 feet on each side. And he takes this big metal bar and he goes down there and he's going to poke a hole for that pine tree he's putting in there. He goes, bang, and it goes bouncing out of his hands and his hands hurt and everything because he hits a rock. And all the Indians in Ojibwe go, how come that's not in his book? How come that wasn't in his book? You know, because he was book learned. And so those are the kinds of lessons that say, look, if you're going to learn about this, let's go down in rice. If you're going to learn about sapping, you're going to go out there and you're going to learn about sapping. And we might as well learn about some of the other medicines that are along here. You know, there's 100 plants I never even asked a single question about. There's 100 questions about the leaves and the roots and the berries and what time and how do you mix it and what's the proportions, you know, and what should we avoid? Don't ever eat anything a bear avoids. Don't ever eat anything a deer avoids. You're likely to die because you know that anything that a deer or a bear can eat, a human being can eat, and anything a bear or a deer avoids is probably going to give you a lot of problems. Pretty easy concept when we're following around and looking at our clans and, you know, and then the wolves, you know, who get a chronic wasting disease in Wisconsin. There is no chronic wasting disease where there are wolf packs because the minute a deer starts going slow, they get them and take them down and eliminate the disease. So there's lots of things that we can learn from observation and asking our elders and being with them. Now, there's 1,000 questions that I would ask them. I would say, tell me the story about Juni Gijik when he put you out on your 10-day fast. Tell me again what you saw. Tell me again how you pooped your pants after 10 days when what you were looking for appeared and scared it out of you. Because he looked at me and said, look, you know what happened when this thing appeared? My grandpa is Junia Gijik, silver streaking in the sky. Junia is used for coins nowadays and money. And the language changes because the kids say, hey, got some jutes. Well, Junia means the silver color. So it means coins. We used to say Junia. Junia ain't suck Junia for money. And people use it for paper money sometimes, even though it's referenced to silver. And kids have, what do you call it, slangized it to jutes in our community. But Junia Gijik was an interesting name. People says, money sky? No. The place between the earth and that outer realm, there's a thin layer there that shimmers when you look up, and it shimmers. And it marks that little lining between earth and oxygen in outer space. That's what Junia Gijik means, that shimmering edge of the creation that we live within, that bubble that encloses us and embraces us and allows us to stay alive on this planet. That's what Junia Gijik is. My name is Skabewis. That's what I call myself. My actual Ojibwe name is just a little bit different, and there's a reason for that, okay? Skabewis is a title, and it is my name. I use it as both. The elder says, not only when you were working in the lodge were you working as a Skabewis, but we gave you that name, Skabewis, because we didn't want you to be able to get away from the responsibilities. So when someone says, is there a Skabewis in there? And someone says, well, I was a Skabewis or worker in the lodge, and you can come over here. Would you like to be a Skabewis? We'll give you some tobacco. Can you help serve the elders the food? Here's some tobacco, be a Skabewis for this feast, and they all go out. I can't get away from it, because if an elder says, is there a Skabewis in the crowd? I have to respond to that. Whether I want to be a Skabewis or not, I got that name. And I thought, you know, I'd rather have a name like some of those Menominee people do, you know, like dark black hair streaming in the moonlight of the night while the wind blows around. One of those kinds of Menominee names. Or what's your tribe? They give those kinds of names out, really elegant, you know. He's so handsome, kind of. I got the messenger. When I first got my name, I says, why did you have to name me the messenger, man? This guy, Apashanakwich, you know, a big storm doing something, you know, and this guy over here, all the, you know, they're doing neat things. Why do I have to name messenger? And then 10 years later, I saw a scroll. Sitting next to the crater on that scroll was Skabewis. People often ask me, what did that old man teach you? Well, I don't know. I saw him do a whole lot of things. So what did you do for that old man? Made sure he had 2 sugars in his coffee and his ashtray was empty wherever he went. And I sat there. So a couple years before he passed away, he looked at me and said, you know, if I ever hear you telling anyone that I gave you permission to do anything, I'm going to slap your butt from heaven. There you are. And you see people, well, you know, this old man gave me permission to do this. But Mustache says, no. If I ever hear you do that, man, you're going to get slapped. You were there and saw what happened. You heard what was said. Go find it up here. You don't need permission to do what we do in our community. Do it. And do it the way you saw it done. You don't need to read a book. You don't need to travel to Canada to learn something. You don't know to go to the Seminoles in Florida to pick something up, or the Arapaho or anyone else. This is the way we do it right here. And you don't need my permission to do what we do as long as you do it the way you saw it done here. Keep it going. I know I had a young man that come up one time and handed him a resume when I was nearby. He says, here's who I am. I'd like to come visit you. And the old man took that resume and ripped it up and threw it in the garbage right next to him and says, come up and work for me for a couple of months and I'll tell you who you are. You can put anything on that thing. Oh, I'm an expert here and I'm an expert in that and everything else, but you know, you don't know a god darn thing. Nothing. Look good with that beaded vest on though. Looks pretty, even though you don't know anything. So the elders had ways to teach people how to do things, and sometimes they were just put on the spot. I was, I don't know, 22 years old when old man Mustache that you saw up there went to perform a wedding in a little community called Zora on the Menominee Reservation. And a friend of mine was married up there. And so he took out his pipe, and a lot of people make a big deal about that. I got about 5 or 6 pipes, and I carry one for someone else. Otherwise, the pipes are mine to use. But I carry one for one entity, and that's the only pipe I carry. But the first time I ever had a chance to work with a pipe, old man just gave it to me and says, here, put it up, petition it. Here's the tobacco, do your thing. And I go, what do I do? He says, do it. You've seen me do it before. Why do I got to explain everything to you? Do what you see. Okay, put tobacco in here. It's pretty easy. There's only 4 directions in the world, and then there's the earth and there's the sky. There's only 6 things you can write, unless you get into, you know, all the little subunits, you know, want to give an offering the pipe up to the strawberries and the leaves. No, we do the earth, we do the creation, we do the directions, we give thanks to all those things that all those things bring. So teaching was an interesting method, because sometimes setting someone up is a teaching method. You know, in our community, a lot of our kids are says, run free and get in the woods, learn about this stuff on your own, experience it. You know, we could read a book about it, or he could get out in the woods. And so there's a lot of experimentation. I know there was a young man that came up one time when I was working with pipe and says, I got this pipe, and I just left him alone. You know, I didn't need to know the intimacy of what was being asked, but somewhere in this, pipe said that the guy said, oh, I asked to do something and I told him to go ahead. He says, can I do this? And the answer was, yeah, you can do that. And so the guy ran off, and 2 weeks later, he came back crying around, said that some old lady took his pipe away. Pipe says, why do you think they did that? Well, I don't know. They told me I was doing something wrong. I told him, I says, Pipe Mustache said I could do that. Pipe says, yeah. You asked me, can I do that? You didn't give me tobacco and say, what's the correct way to do this? He says, hey, can I do this? I got this idea. I want to do this. And the old man said, yeah, you can do it. And off he went and he did it. And he got his pipe taken away. What's the lesson? The lesson is you better ask the right questions of an old man like that, because Pipe tried to teach him a lesson. Yes, you can do whatever you want. Is it correct? Is it proper? Is it what you do in your community? I don't know. Go do whatever you want to do. And if you get hollered at, you can say Pipe said, oh, he gave me permission. Hear that again? Oh, Pipe Mustache said I could do that. Oh, most of the old people would know that. Yeah, well, Pipe Mustache probably goes around and tells people they can do whatever they want to do whenever they want to do because they haven't asked the right question. Is it the right way to do it? Excuse me. But I got taught a few lessons, and I learned from it over the years. Those are teaching methods that, people in academic tracks sometimes don't get in the non-Indian world. They don't get and would be offended by it and are offended by it because they're coming into our turf and almost trying to say, well, this is what I like the outcome to be, this is what I'm coming here for. It's like the man that said, look at, here's who I am. And the old man says, come here and I'll watch you for a while and I'll tell you who you are. Let me judge you. So in our community, a lot of times we don't introduce ourselves. We do that introduction so you know where my clan is. Makwa Dudame, which is Bear Clan. Odawa Zagaigading, which is Lac Coutre Oreilles. The Lake of the Short Ears, Apading Madeo. I'm a member of the Medewan Lodge in the first degree. All those simple things that kind of introduce you, but we're typically not the people who speak our names first, I'm this and I'm that, and I'll tell you how about this and all that. Let other people talk to you. That's what we try to say about that. Let other people tell you who you are because they can see you outside of some of the egos that we have. So where are we at? Do we got a couple more minutes? Did you have another question? Yes. Okay. Would you quit answering the first question?
Oh, no, you're good. I think we have time for just one more question. So I'm combining two questions. And so if you are willing to just talk, so we have two folks that asked to just talk a little bit more about thinking about the land and how it is a pharmacy. And so just thinking through some of your own personal experiences with medicine and thinking about as well if there is a place for synthetic pharmaceuticals and just overall the trajectory of health and medicine within Indian country, which is, you have 7 minutes.
I did. If everyone heard that out there, right? You're connected in. So
I think
heard
so.
It. Okay,
yeah.
so I mean, part of it is there. Let me answer the first thing. Is there a place for synthetics? Somewhere in this world, there's probably a place for everything that's invented and used in some way. But I constantly tell my kids and other people, look at if we can get away from synthetics and other things and get into the woods, that might be a lot better because, we're a society that you turn the TV on, here's a pill for this, a pill for that, pill for this, buy this, buy you can't use it for this, we're going to kill you, and then the disclaimer at the end. But everyone's trying to sell drugs. It's one nation of drug dealers, if you ask me, from a certain perspective. Is there a place? Probably. If it saves lives, absolutely. synthetic drugs may be something that God gave us as well, if you want to look at it that way. But I think that what I'd rather see is people to try to get back to some of these natural things, at least in my community. When the pandemic came on, you know, I have several teas that the elders gave to us, some of them that are rehabilitative teas. That is you would use them after you've been thoroughly sick and you're on your back and deathbed and they want to revive you, okay? We use some of those to infuse people with all of that beforehand, okay? So I can't tell you, I mean, I'm vaccinated and boosted, and I've been drinking several concoctions of teas out of the woods. You know, I use birch quite a bit in the teas because it's anti-inflammatory, but you got to make birch tea to be able to do that. So you got to work your way into that. There are many, many other products that I've used. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about that right now because in order to get that information, you have to approach me in a little bit of a different way to get that information. But I can tell you this, that my partner at one point came down with COVID, and I was kissing on her until the half hour before she says, I think I'm getting really sick. I got to go and I think we ought to get tested. And she came up positive with COVID and I didn't get it. And so I asked the question, was it the vaccinations and the booster, or was it the teas, or what, was it everything? But the general rule is to keep yourself healthy. You know, we use cedar a lot because it's an infusion of some really good green things that have rehabilitated capabilities and congestion things with the menthol in it. If we were going to be using a cough syrup, I might take a birch bark base and take it beyond 66%, which is syrup, and take it up to 71 or 72, so it's very thick, and then infuse some cedar into it. I mean, some of that stuff is pretty common remedies, not in tribal communities, but for anyone who's using traditional things. That was one of our traditional cough syrups, which is very commonly known, using birch as the anti-inflammatory, and cedar as a rehabilitative thing. It's going to give you a good rush, like a Starbucks double espresso in the morning, because of the things that are in it. But cedar is used for a lot of cough and throat remedies, and some of these are common. You can read about them, just go online and learn about things. I mean, it's the indigenous medicinal knowledge is not like just some narrow little path. You find all kinds of people that are not natives who are using this stuff in different combinations. And you have to understand that that's what medicine lodge is about, is going through certain ways, just like you have to go to school in some cases to learn chemical concoctions, especially if you're going to offer them to the public. I'm a doctor, let me put this together and give it to you and see what happens. It takes a lot more than that. And even some of these things that work for some people don't work for others. And any doctor understands that thoroughly, that sometimes you have to work with the patient because someone needs X number of milligrams of pain-killing stuff to get over the pain, and someone needs 3 times that. And so you work with these medicines and work with the people and know the people. You just don't run to someone one time and say, hey, I got this remedy. If you were an Indian, what would you give me? Here, chew on this. It doesn't quite work that way. Much, much more extensive. And there are bodies of traditional Indian medicine remedies. I mean, Dinsmore wrote up all kinds of stuff that's just common remedies in the woods, and a lot of non-Indigenous people know those, that body of information like anyone else. People who study plants don't have to go to an Indian to ask them what those properties and what those plants do. People who study plants don't have to go anywhere. They can see what it is when they're studying those plants. What's interesting is a lot of this stuff replicates traditional ecological knowledge. You know, as simple as the thing, I talked about the Dickonogan, the cradle board that everyone talks about. You know, a cradle board, you know, you put a little papoose in it, you know, and blah, 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 and all that. A cradle board hangs on a wall. A cradle board leans up against a tree, right? Now, what do you think most kids in modern day history, when they're in a, what do they call them, bassinet? Yeah, here's what a non-Indian kid sees when he's born. All day long, for weeks and weeks and weeks, he really gets to know the ceiling of his home really well. This is what an Indian child sees in a dickanoggin or a cradle board. Grandma and grandpa cutting up a deer. Oh, there's mom over there. I recognize her. Well, that's her. I can smell her way over here, right? Oh, look at there. There's my brothers and sisters. I have brothers and sisters. I didn't know. Do I have any brothers and sisters? Oh, yeah, I see them once in a while when they quit making me stare at the ceiling all day long. There's psychologists and people that are looking at the cradle board and say, wow, this is a really good thing. And there are other indigenous things that are a really good thing. Like we haven't even talked about, you know, Captain Honeyway Dockstader fighting in Valley Forge, my relatives with his 2 wives and 66 Oneida warriors and how they saved the United States and offered up a bolt of blue cloth that, and then wanted to pay us $50 a month to the Oneida Nation. And we says, no, we don't want the $50. We'd rather have the cloth and we'll take the $50 because the US government says, well, we'll just give you a $10,000 check and get it over. No. The big brothers, little brothers, the House, the Congress, and the veto power of the president came out of the Iroquois Confederacy paradigm of the Confederacy. By the people, for the people, of the people, and something that they didn't steal from us. And for those yet unborn came out of the Iroquois Confederacy. All right, miigwech. Appreciate the time. Glad you could join us. And it is now 1 minute over time, and I know all you people out in cyberspace are ready to rush off right now. Hey, listen, don't worry about the test I haven't written yet. I'll give you a little warning about what the questions will be one of these days. Thank you.